School of Law, and I'd like to thank you for joining me today. Before we start, I have a couple of technical notes from Ben regarding our participation in the webinar, and here they are. First, please limit all background noise around you. If you're on speakerphone, please mute your phone unless you're speaking, and this will help us have a clearer audio for all participants. We will also have questions and comments at the end of the presentation. This is going to be a rather short presentation. Friday afternoon, and I understand people might have places to go. If you have comments and questions about the presentation that you would like to share, please submit that in the chat window that is on your screen. It should be on the right-hand side of your screen. And you can pose a question or comment to the whole group or direct a question to either Ben or me. And also, you can submit any technology questions and concerns that you might have to Ben as well. Okay, my lesson today will deal with using classroom flipping techniques to bring in active learning into the law classroom. And this lesson builds off my TEDx-style talk on active learning, which I hope you will view on the LegalED website. But you don't need to have watched the talk to follow this particular lesson. This lesson can exist independently on its own. Now, flipped classroom techniques are something of a novelty in law teaching, although it has been more prevalent in the undergraduate teaching scenarios. And in the undergraduate classroom, the idea of flipping the classroom means taking the content of the course, whether it's a humanities course or a science course or a social science course, and presenting that content, instructing upon it outside classroom. And in doing so, it reserves the active learning opportunities and activities that apply the course content that's been flipped for moments in the live classroom. And the way to present outside content or content outside the classroom in the flipping method has been predominantly through video lectures, short video lectures, mind you, that resemble the quick and brief videos on YouTube in length. And the videos could be done through using animation, through various apps that are available, or it could be an old-fashioned taped video of a lecture, and there's nothing at all wrong or deviant from that. I believe that flipping the classroom can offer great uses for any classroom situation, whether in the law school context or not. Teaching any subject in the law, in my view, has been it's very much like revealing the narrative about a law. And one way tried and true that has been around has been the case method, looking at cases to help us not only figure out how to read cases and discern legal reasoning, but also how to distill the individual rules of law for a particular subject area. But that is only one method to show the story of the law, or particularly that law. Flipping the classroom is another method, and one that can be used, I think, strategically throughout the course to free the professor to do other things in the classroom. But here's a kicker. In my view, translating the general idea of flipping the classroom into the law poses some challenges in the traditional case law course. Because most of the time, courses that are taught Socratically investigate the law through case readings and dialogue. And the purpose of flipping the classroom, which is to free up time for active learning activities, is kind of violated in that sense. Although a flipped video could teach the legal concepts in animation or summarize the law in some sort of video, it really can't replace the Socratic dialogue in the class and go over cases in the way that a live course could. So translating the flipped method into a course in law school can be a bit problematic in this regard. We sort of can't capture it sort of purely the way it's been used in the undergrad situation, in my opinion. So what ends up is usually extra instruction on the law that helps clarify doctrine for students and then complement classroom case discussions. This is how flipping the classroom technique has been, adapted for classroom use in law schools the most effectively. As a side note, however, the pairing between the flipped method and the problem method in law teaching works much more true to form to the original incarnation of the flipped classroom. So the problem method instead of the case method does that the flipped method a lot more justice, and works a lot more, or is more compatible with each other. So for instance, if you might have a practice simulation course that utilizes flipped classroom instruction, and it usually works pretty well. Legal writing courses also can be used. You can use the flipped method to instruct students how to cite or deal with authorities, the distinctions between persuasive or primary authorities and other sort of knowledge-based instruction, and then have a much more lively session in the classroom dealing with other parts of legal writing. Doctrinal classes taught strictly with the problem method works really well, like I said, but also bar prep can work really well with the flipped method of using videos to give a short bites about the law that the students will need to know for an exam, on a bar exam. So how can we make the most, even though we're not in that context, hypothetically, how can we make the most of this technique in the traditional law classroom? Well, you could use the flip method to footnote bits and pieces of the class, but what if we can marry the active learning components, problem methods of a course, with the use of the flipped classroom technique? And that's my lesson for today. Maybe this is a bastardization of the technique, but for those of us who may not want to truncate the case-style law completely in a traditional law classroom, a doctrinal law classroom, and still utilize the technology components of the flipped instruction method, this compromise is actually quite helpful and comports with some of the learning methods for the millennial generation. What I have done is to create hypothetical exercises and simulations using flipped technology. I find that the traditional way we test students sometimes to be a bit too hermetic, and students tend to get used to reading fact patterns instead of experiencing them in another way. The way I use the flipped technology then transfers their way of spotting issues from one medium to another, and they can watch the way I flipped it on their own after classes as a problem to do as homework to make sure that they have understood the doctrine. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. What I have here is a fact pattern that I used to give to my remedies students on the first day of remedies class to walk them through a particular or hypothetical situation that would require them to know the law of remedies. Now, remedies is a course that straddles between torts and contracts, and usually the fact pattern I give is one that involves a construction contract that has some property damage and even theft. The students don't know quite the law yet, but they have taken at least torts and contracts, and it just wakes them up to what the course actually looks like. It looks like a typical law school final examination hypo that I give on the first day, just to get their, hopefully allow them to see what the course might look like or feel like as far as the facts are concerned. But sometimes I don't give this particular written fact hypo to the students to do in class. Instead, I will use a flipped version of the same hypo that I can create into a visual presentation that walks through the factual scenarios so that the students can physically see the issues. So here was a couple of screenshots from that particular presentation. It's kind of a long presentation, so I don't want to show it in this particular time frame. But the hypothetical involves a contract. It involves a contract for the restanding of a wooden floor in a house. And there might have been some delay and incomplete work, and might have been some damages to the property, and some unsavory complications that involve both torts and contract issues. And at the end of the day, if you're the attorney for the owner, how well can you articulate her case as far as her remedies are concerned? And I use pictures and slideshows, and I narrate through this particular visual presentation to change up the way that they are issue spotting when they're given a set of facts that aren't articulated by words. I want my students to play with these facts. I want them to be proficient in seeing the law in close to real-life situations as they can possibly recreate. So I've created a fact pattern here that I've written to make the facts and the law jump out at them. That's sort of my intention. They have to watch this presentation and afterwards make arguments accordingly. And this is how I use the flip method to infuse an active learning component into the classroom. I've noticed that because of this, the students become much more actively engaged in the facts. But also, it changes the dynamics of their responses. They become much better at articulating the facts because they've basically walked through an investigation through this particular flipped medium, but seeing a lot of the things, seeing the color of the wood on the floor, the kind of damage that is posed to the homeowner, and they can do a better job at sort of coloring the facts if they need to, in order to better serve the hypothetical homeowner here. I've also gotten students to put skits that instruct on what we've covered that they can then contribute to the flip part of the course. So the next variation on this particular theme is to have the students create fact patterns that then they can help infuse into the class and use as a flipped part of instruction. We've often talked about as a good way of reinforcing pedagogy and also helping students learn the material better, to have students write their own fact patterns. And this is just a variation except using technology and using the flipped medium. I've had students make factual hypos in contracts when we were studying contract formation that test out offers and counteroffers and preliminary negotiations. And they've worked beautifully because the students now have to be engaged in knowing exactly what the law is and what factual scenarios they can dream up in which they have to apply the law, but also then do it in a way that also helps them test their other classmates. If it's a video that's involved instead of a slideshow like this example that I've given, it can be quite elaborate, so you have to be kind of careful on how long it takes for students to put the skits together and film them. You don't need a short film, and you don't want a short film, you just want a very quick YouTube-like video. This is one of the reasons why for the remedies hypo, I resorted to using a slideshow, which I narrate, which is a lot more low-tech than filming something. But at some point, I debated about inserting some taped testimonials with the characters, but I feared it might be too long. But I may do that at some point in the future if I think that that's a better idea. This is elaborate, but for my students, the active engagement in my courses is important, even if it's just one exercise that I can bring from a read-write perspective into a simulation that also imports a lot of visual learning technique and audio learning techniques. I don't want them to forget that the law is something that is practiced. And it's also fun for me as an instructor to vary things up for me, to bring things off the page, so to speak. I find it's kind of like creating a scavenger hunt in some ways. There are other variations on this theme. I have done this with single-issue problems instead of a larger exam-type problem. And this is probably the most feasible if you're short on prep time. I thought about inserting this into a hypothetical that's also sort of in the form of a performance test on the multi-state, although this violates the flip method even more. I have also, at the end of the videos, added several questions to ask of students as a self-assessment tool. Like, do you see this? Do you understand why this X, Y, Z was a particular issue? So I sometimes will go beyond just asking to call the question of this simulation, but also at some point I'll give them a couple of hints just so that they can sort of anchor themselves in knowing exactly where they need where they need this issue spot. I use this sometimes after a case with a quick hypothetical that varies a fact from the case. I've used the flipped active learning method as a way to introduce certain transactional things, like walking students through a title search or in contracts a breakdown of what a contract looks like with the preamble, some of the terms, or what does a boilerplate language look like, and how things might show up in a particular contract and the way things are bolded, and so on and so forth. Sometimes I've also bookended a unit lesson with a flipped lecture, and then afterwards used a flipped active learning video like this to use the flip method to reinforce things I've taught in the live classroom, and also to give them another way to play with facts and self-assess. So those are variations on this very theme of infusing the active learning techniques into a flipped method or flipped medium. So thank you for joining me today. As I promised, this was a very short lesson on varying up the flipped classroom method in order to infuse active learning into the class, any law class, and at the same time utilize technology to further law teaching and learning. But the most important thing about this particular webinar, for me at least, is to start a dialogue for the remainder of the time about what we can do to use the flipped method and to reshape it for the law classroom. My name is Jeremiah Ho, and I'm from the University of Massachusetts School of Law. And I'm glad to take any questions and comments at this time. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
This is Michelle Pistone. I wanted to thank you, Jeremiah. This was a really great presentation.
Thank you.
Really helpful.
Oh, so I have a question here that was written by Mary. I just see that she said, will you tell us what they do the next day in the flipped classroom? We sometimes we'll do a discussion or a debrief, and I'll bring back the video, and then we'll go through the factual components of the video and see how we could use this in a courtroom as evidence. I've done that. I've also done it as just a basic debrief of here are the issues, here are what you can do with this particular fact, what were you looking for, how do you analyze this. I've also used this sometimes to show you how students how to write this out on an exam. You've got, for instance, going back to the presentation I had that I used for remedies, the wood floor gets burnt. And at some point I want the students to be able to articulate how badly it was burnt by the sander. It's a good time to say, hey, well, the surface was damaged. It's a square in the middle of a living room, which part of the living room it was. So there's a lot of things I could do with this flipped exercise. It just sort of depends on what I want to focus on that part of the course. If it's a beginning part of the course, I might want to focus on the big picture ideas of the course and the roadmap of where we're going, the organization of the backbone of the doctrine. So may not pull in that kind of detail until maybe for another lesson down the road. But there are many things that you can do after that particular day of looking at the flipped instruction video. Let's see. Anybody else have any questions? Let's see. How much pushback do students that this is too much additional work for them? I try to make this as seamless as possible because I fear that. So I don't do flipped instruction every other day. It sounds like the way I articulate it sounds like I do. But I'm very careful on not doing too much of it. And I use it sort of, I bring it in when they sort of are not suspecting it. So that it feels much more like oh, surprise, we're not doing the same type of page-to-page learning that we're doing every day. We've got a video instead. And I try to make it, I'm a bit sarcastic in the classroom, so I make it lively and try to make it humorous so that I get a lot less rolling eyes or pushback from it. And actually, most of the time, the students like it because for most of the time they've been in law school, they've been looking at short answer hypos from a book or off the page. So it's a bit of a nice change up that they don't really seem to mind the difference in medium. Let's see. There is a question about, has anyone looked into GoAnimate? I think they have the ability to enter a script, and then the sites take care of the animation for you. It might be useful to display an exchange between characters. I have. I like it for some things. I like some of those apps out there where you have talking heads and you can insert dialogue. I do it very sparingly because sometimes it can get a little bit distracting. But I do like it for the most part. Okay, so Chris has a question. I guess my question is, how sophisticated do you need to be for flipping the classroom? I'm actually I'm not high tech. I'm mid, if not, sort of user friendly. Though I use PowerPoint for the most part. And if I do a video, it's usually very low tech. I often resort to narrating through a slideshow that I do through PowerPoint, and it works fairly well. That's not quite very, very high tech. You do need to know sort of how to narrate and capture that and do it slowly, and you just have to work out the logistics on that sometimes, but it's not that quite hard. And sometimes I also will get my IT folks to come in and help me out as well. But very, very high tech in order to be able to utilize this method. Let's see if I can pick out another question. Oh, so Paul has a question. How much work to find pictures, create slides with animation? Is there a special program for this, or is part of it the Word or Mac packages? Some of the, for instance, the pictures I had at the beginning of this particular presentation were from Word packages. I just typed in some keywords to search for pictures that I want, or in the neighborhood, the pictures I'm thinking about. I've also taken pictures from my cell phone cam if I'm dealing with for instance, if those of you have seen my TED Talk with the strawberries, those were taken from a farmer's market from my phone. And it's just, it's a little bit of work, I do admit that, but it helps me sort of be creative and on the ball here with my teaching. So I think, for me at least, it enhances sort of what I'm doing in the classroom. Okay, here's a question from Ray. I use VideoScribe and I find it really unworkable. Is there a way to do an animated, narrated PowerPoint to accomplish the same thing as an animated video? I would say yes. I've done it through my PowerPoint. When I ran a bar service program at Washburn, one of my assistants would lecture through for some PowerPoints for con law and evidence and other sort of MBE type subjects using PowerPoint. It seems to work well. I don't recall at the time if there was an enhancement on the PowerPoint software that we use from IT, but there is a way to do it. I also agree with you that VideoScribe can be a little bit clunky, and that's why I resort to something a little bit easier and user-friendly for me, at least. Hope that answers your question.
This is Michelle Pistone. I used VideoScribe, and I found that it took a lot of time to create a video. And so I ended up selecting topics that I knew would have longevity, but it take a lot of time and a steep learning curve. But I just wanted to point out that I did a blog post that has information on creating educational videos for legal education, and it's on the blog on LegalED, and I'm going to send the link now.
If there's any other questions, but these are pretty good questions.
And just so the audience knows, I unmuted you guys. So if you have a question, you can just ask the question directly now.
Great.
Just a basic question. I'm real new to LegalED. What is the name of the website there?
It is Michelle.
LegalEdWeb.com.
LegalEdWeb.com. Okay. Okay, and I had just a general question in listening. As you know, more and more classes are online. I'm an adjunct professor and I'm teaching online, and all the other adjunct professors are now teaching online at my school, and online teaching is growing. Are you going to be having any classes in the future about online teaching as opposed to the regular in-person teaching that probably most of you do?
Michelle, do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting. You should know about also there's a group that formed a few years ago called Distance Learning and Legal Education. I might be able to find something. I'll do a quick search. But I've been involved in that group, and that group is focusing a lot on distance learning. So the online stuff that you're talking about, I'm not sure whether they do webinars, but it's an interesting idea, and it might be something that we can look into if there's sufficient interest. We definitely have connections to people who are working in that area. And so I appreciate that you brought it up, and Ben and I will look into whether we can find someone and set up a webinar maybe for the spring on topics related to straight distance learning. So are you doing synchronous or asynchronous?
I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I mean, my school just said, all right, to all adjunct professors, next semester, all adjunct professors are teaching their courses online. Simple as that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wow.
So
we all have to learn that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess.
So anyway, my point is that there are a lot of restrictions on what we can do online. For example, we can't show videos and things like that. On the other hand, it is a new frontier, so there is room for some new thinking, within these constraints. That's how I see it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do through LegalED is create a repository of materials that people could use in all different forms of education. So they could be incorporated into even an online course. You might not be able to show a video during your talk, but you could have students, you could think about having students watch videos as homework before they come, if you're doing a synchronous lecture, before they come to the synchronous lecture, you could flip part of what you might talk about to them in that lecture onto video. So you can assign the video as homework. And really what we're trying to do through LegalED is create a repository for a lot of materials so that everyone doesn't have to reinvent the wheel and create all these materials from scratch. There's a lot that we can do collaboratively as a community.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you one other question, okay? And I don't know if this is the subject of another webinar or where you're at on this. Is anybody using YouTube in terms of your regular classroom teaching?
I do use YouTube, and I want to also address another question that also I think dovetails with your question. Hold on a second. That Chris had sent in, and it was maybe using a YouTube channel to help accomplish some of the same goals without producing the videos myself. Another variation on this lesson is to use there are a lot of YouTube videos that law students have made that's online that have walked through in a flipped way, a particular doctrinal section or an issue. And sometimes I ask students, if they are interested in to find one that is dealing with the same doctrine that we're using or we're learning, and then see if they can critique it, see if there's something that they can add to it, or if there's something that's wrong about it, or there's something brilliant about the way that the students in another video have done. I haven't had students do too much of this, but it does utilize YouTube. It also highlights, from my point of view, what I know of what they're doing beyond my class, which is to go onto YouTube to look at what sometimes other law students at other law schools have done to talk about the same subject that they're learning. Because I know that students do that. And I know that there's a social media component to that blends in pretty well. I was in law school when we had MySpace, so and Facebook was on sort of its cutting edge at the time. So I can tap into that a little bit, that sort of memory under my fingertips, to kind of capture in the interest in the course that way. But I think definitely a YouTube channel that I do for my own class would be a great idea. I haven't done that yet. But I also do use YouTube sometimes to get students engaged in a different way.
Right. And are you going to post something on that, or
I could write
use of YouTube or do a webinar or something?
If there's interest, it'd be up to Michelle and Ben and the others at LegalED. But if there's actual interest about that, I mean, this is a very small thing that I just sometimes will bring up, just a very small technique that I would vary up in my courses. But I could, I'd be happy to look into the use of YouTube for law school courses if it will benefit all of us, and I'd be happy to do that.
Well, I mean, just so that everyone knows, all of the LegalED videos are up on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, so people could access them through YouTube or through Vimeo. They're also all on Vimeo, or through the LegalED website. Once we're working on improving the website and including more functionality, and once we have more functionality, it will be much like the same kind of functions that exist on YouTube will be part of the functionality of the LegalED website.
And just to jump in here, there's I believe there's another conference coming up, correct, Michelle?
Yes, we're hosting another conference in March. It's March 19th and 20th at American University in Washington, D.C. And the call for talks is out now. So if anyone's interested in giving a presentation about things that you're doing in the classroom, about law school pedagogy, please put in a proposal for talks. And then we'd also encourage you, even if you're not talking, to come to the conference, because last year's conference was a really energetic, exciting collection of talks, all of which are less than 10 minutes, on interesting innovations in legal education. So what would you add there, Maya? Yeah.
Oh, it was a lot of fun, and a very collegial group. The medium of doing TED Talks was new to a lot of us, but I was super amazed that of all the kind of presentations and the quality of the presentations that were out there, and just glad to know that people were experimenting with technology and also with pedagogy at the same time. It was a really, really fun conference to go to and to be a part of.
You can find the call for talks on the homepage. There's a link to it on the homepage of LegalED Web.
I would say that if you're interested in doing a TEDx style, a presentation, even if it's not within the context of law schools, there is a fun learning curve to capture in. I think all of us at that conference watched probably a bazillion TED Talks in prep just to see what it's like to do one. But once you get that sort of under your belt, it's a fun medium to work with. It can be very short and crisp and really distilled with what you want to say, and it helps you out immensely. I think my other sort of presentations since then have been upped as far as the energy and the quality because of this particular conference that I just happened to go to last April. It was a lot of fun, and it was very, very memorable as far as everything for me is concerned as a law teacher.
Oh, I just saw that there was a comment from Deborah Anker.
Oh.
Want to respond to that, Jeremiah?
Sure.
It's a different culture in Australia with respect.
Oh, okay. To give me more context, come from a different law teaching culture where the Socratic method is not used much. One of our issues is students not attending lectures. Is it the general case that your students attend all lectures? Is it generally compulsory? At least my school is, and the previous school that I taught at, both of them were, we took attendance, so they had to be there. And there were a very narrow room for excuses, and so it's a lot more regimented as far as I'm concerned, as far as attendance is concerned. I think that if my school didn't compel students to come to class, it would be kind of like the situation I see when students graduate and go off to take the bar exam. Now a lot of their content, from Barbary and Kaplan, are online, and they watch it from home. So I could see that the flipped method could be useful in that situation. Although there is something about coming to class if you pay for it, but there could be some avenues to explore there. I think there's another comment from Mary Sue Backus. As I understand your assignment, you aren't really flipping the class where you deliver the content before the class and use class time to work through the problems, etc. Instead, are you delivering content in class and having them do problems outside of class? This version is, I still use the Socratic dialogue. I use the light Socratic dialogue in my class, and I like using cases because the cases are essentially facts and doctrine mixed together, and in the way we parse it out, it sort of helps the students understand what legal reasoning is, in addition to learning what the doctrine I'm teaching. So that is preserved for the most part, but the videos I use are posted on my twin site. So they have to access that. For instance, this remedies slideshow that I put together, I usually, when I first started teaching remedies, that was a one-page fact pattern. And now, instead, they have to access that on the twin site before the first day of class as an assignment. And then we go over it in class for a little bit, and then we move on to the other kinds of instruction. So this stuff is really outside of the class, if I didn't make that impression clearer. So it is still flipping the classroom because I'm using outside instruction, but then in that outside instruction, I'm infusing with active learning. I've done the flip method as well, often to reinforce some of the doctrine we've used in class, and if I find that, for instance, in contracts where we're talking about the Battle of the Forms or 2207, it can be very involved, and I want to make sure that the students understand every nook and cranny that I want to go over. So sometimes I will use the flipped instruction to, in the more formal sense, to sort of augment the course. And then that also helps me free up time to do problems in class, which is actually kind of helpful. But in this incarnation of the variation on the theme that I'm using today, I do have them access it through the website for the course. So they aren't looking at the presentation during the class. Are there any more other comments or questions?
Well, thank you very much, Jeremiah.
Thank you, Michelle, for letting me do this webinar, and thanks to Ben for your help throughout the entire process. And thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you. This was terrific. I am going to stop recording now, and it should save
Okay.
for further viewing.